Yeah, so Many Babies 3 started also quite some time ago now, and I want to tell you a little bit about where we are right now. So Many Babies 3 is about rule learning, the ability of children or of infants to learn abstract rules based on linguistic stimuli. And let me see if I can actually get to the next slide. Yes, there we go. So this is a replication effort, or a replication effort based on the study by Marcus and colleagues from 1999, where they studied the learning of algebraic rules in linguistic stimuli. So the stimuli are sequences of syllables such as lay, way, way, g, j, j, lay, d, d, those sorts of sequences that infants are being familiarized with. And the question that Marcus posed in this paper was whether infants will generalize to novel sequences with the same structure, but composed of different syllables. And he found a very large effect in that particular paper. In particular, 15 out of 16 infants showed a particularly large novelty effect. And overall, that was a highly significant effect. It's an interesting and strong result, and it has been used a lot in theoretical work also, for explaining the basis of language learning in infants, and some of the work has also been done across other species. So the ability to manipulate abstract symbols is thought to lie at the heart of many cognitive capacities, among them language, but also others. So why do we want to replicate this study, given that it's such a big result? Well, later results didn't find quite such large results, and in fact, a recent meta-analysis that is shown here, or the results of that are shown here, show a large variety of results with a huge range of effect sizes, also negative effect sizes, also large positive effect sizes. But basically, they're all over the place. There does seem to be an overall effect. But we certainly want to find out which factors contribute to this large heterogeneity in reported effect sizes. Another important reason, of course, for wanting to replicate is that the paper has become hugely famous and is quoted in many other papers in textbooks, and has become a cornerstone finding in infant cognitive development. So then why do we want to do this within Many Babies? Well, only within a Many Babies settings will we be able to reach the sorts of effect sizes to establish robustness, and at the same time testing for the effects that we're interested in. But there are a couple of other reasons that are particularly relevant to this topic. Most of previous studies were done in English language countries, whereas the claim for this finding is that it is universally valid and across different languages and across different countries, whereas the sampling until now has been relatively limited and non-representative. So for testing sort of the universality of this sort of finding, a large and diverse group of labs that would participate would be would give much stronger validity to these results. And also, of course, a large sample allows us to study the heterogeneity across procedures. The original study was using head-turn preference, but we want to test it with different paradigms, as was also done in Many Babies 1. So head-turn preference, but also central fixation and eye tracking. In particular, the research questions that we're studying, going back to some of the meta-analytic results, are, well, first of all, we want to establish the robustness of this finding, and see how variable it is across labs if we standardize as much as possible all the procedures between labs. And then importantly, we want to study a number of modulatory effects. Is it dependent on age? Not many studies have addressed that question directly, and the meta-analysis didn't give any specific direction for that effect, but we still want to find out, of course, whether this ability to learn these rules depends on age or develops with age. I already mentioned the variability across experimental paradigms, which would be partly a replication of Many Babies 1, where there were some differences found between heteron preference and other paradigms. And we want to see whether a linguistic background has an effect on rule learning. Claartje, can you tell us a little bit more about the stimuli that we developed for this particular occasion?
Yeah. Yeah, so the original stimuli were, of course, geared towards these English acquiring infants. They also sounded very robotic. They were made by a Bell Lab synthesizer. But they also contained some, well, possibly confounding intonation contours. That is not, well, that's usually nowadays we don't have those intonation contours anymore in stimuli that could like give little groups already and might have had some effect. The syllables also had different length, and they were also very invariant. So in terms of phonological features, so there were a lot of coronal consonants and front vowels like J and J and lay and D. So that we wanted to make it more varied, but also we tried to make a kind of a universal set of syllables, at least that could be interpretable as distinct syllables, distinct sounds in all the different languages that are spoken in the countries where the labs are. So, and so we kind of came up with these universal syllables, and we tested those syllables using Amazon Mechanical Turk to see whether they were interpretable indeed as separate syllables in a lot of different backgrounds. So so we had this norming study through Mechanical Turk, and we well, picked the best syllables, or the syllables that were ranked 4 or higher on this scale that went up to 6. And those syllables were, well, are part of the stimuli now.
Yeah, so with those, yeah, so with those new stimuli, we well, we are confident that we're in a much better position to test this rule learning effect across a larger sample of, you know, different linguistic backgrounds in infants. Otherwise, we stayed relatively close to the Marcus design. We have a 2-minute familiarization, 12 test trials, counterbalanced, some counterbalancing conditions, etc. So those were all very close to the Marcus, to the original design. A main deviation or addition to the Marcus design is that we offer labs the option to use different setups. The heteron preference was the original Marcus design, but we also offer labs the option to use central fixation or eye tracking. And as I mentioned before, in Many Babies 1, it was found that heteron preference generally produces larger effect sizes than central fixation and eye tracking. And so we're hoping to also well, learn something with this study about whether that effect holds up across different experimental paradigms, or whether that was unique to Many Babies 1. So that's an additional hypothesis that we're testing beyond the rule learning effect itself. What else do we ask of labs? We ask labs to contribute a minimum sample size of 16 infants. Otherwise, rather typical requirements for participation, typical development. Ooh, that was a little bit too fast. Normal hearing, etc. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Then a few words about the analytical approach. As customary these days, we'll be using mixed effects models. We will be using both frequentist and Bayesian versions of those to be also able to report on the strength of evidence in favor of null hypothesis versus the hypothesis of interest. In addition to that, and I think we spend a bit of time on that in the project, is to think about some form of robustness analysis in addition to the main analysis, where we're going to do a multiverse analysis with a number of variations in the selection of the data. For example, the minimal required looking time, as there isn't any strong evidence for having hard cutoffs for minimal looking times in looking time studies. We want to see what the effect of such variations is if we set it at half a second or 1 second, or different types of thresholds. What will remain of our effect? So that is, I think, another interesting addition where we're going to, well, that speaks to the robustness of infant looking time paradigms more broadly. Where are we now in this project? The register report was accepted just prior to the summer break at Developmental Science. So we're really happy that we can now go ahead with starting the data collection, or at least preparing for that. We have over 50 collaborators, more than 35 labs signed up. Expected sample sizes at least 450, maybe more. And the data collection period is lasts for a year, starting from roughly now, whenever the first labs actually start sending us their pilot data, which is starting to happen very soon. So that's where we are, preparing for data collection, ethics, approval, etc. However, it's not too late to sign up. So please do if you are interested. Yes, everyone is welcome to sign up and contribute data. There are also still many opportunities for other types of contributions. We're also still working on the analysis pipeline, writing and documenting code, producing graphics from the data. So anyone wanting to contribute to those sorts of tasks, you're more than welcome to send me an email or contact us in any way possible. And we'll set you up. A third possibility to contribute is to think about spin-off studies that could result from these data, and or by adding little things to the current data collection. One option that has been discussed a couple of times, and that I think can be very interesting, is a pupillometry addition, meaning that for the eye tracking labs, we can get some information on attention that infants have for during the familiarization. But there are many other options, I guess, that people can think of. Thank you for your attention, and here's a bunch of important links. The most important one is the reference to tomorrow's hackathon, where we will be discussing the option to also study rule learning in comparative settings. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ingmar and Claartje. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask before we move on to the next talk?
Hey, great talk. I was kind of curious to hear more about what some of the sister projects, spin-off projects might look like. Of course, the market study tests a very particular kind of rule-based pattern. So one thing that I was kind of curious about is how much the team has kind of talked about generalizing to other sorts of abstract rule-based sort of patterns. Has that come up at all, or what other kinds of directions are you most excited about?
Well, so spin-off projects haven't been discussed a whole lot, except for the pupillometry variation, where the idea would be to see whether you know, online attention for the stimuli sort of predicts whether they would be learning or not, or whether that is related to cognitive load. Otherwise, not many have been discussed, but I'd be happy to.